Hello and welcome, friends, to We Heal with healers Eliana Miranda and Holly Wheeler. We have expansive conversations about healing our hearts, bodies, lineages, communities, and our beloved home planet. We are so happy to invite you into this space. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to We Heal with Eliana Miranda and Holly Wheeler. We just wanted to start off this episode by thanking you, our audience, for all of the incredible feedback that we've gotten for the Sacred Allyship episode. We were so excited to hear how that downloaded and transmitted for you. So thank you so much for all of those who reached out, and we continue to receive your feedback. We are working on our sound quality and just working out all the kinks in this podcast. We're both completely new to podcasting and to recording in this way. So just know that we are bringing in more quality into to enhance our presentation and just working with how to get this message to you all even more clearly and more defined for this new world of technology that we're all living in. So yeah, just stay tuned. We're only going up from here. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about divine feminine healing. And we know that's kind of a buzzword in today's society, especially on social media. So we wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of it and start off by first just talking about what even is divine feminine healing and where did this whole saying come from? So, Holly, would you like to kind of bring us into this conversation?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I would love to clarify why we talk about divine feminine healing and why it's such a buzzword and what it is that we're healing when we're talking about divine feminine healing. So obviously, we all know about the witches and what happened with the witches back in the day. When white men around the world were killing magical women and killing the healers and just kind of a mass genocide that was kind of attacking women specifically and specifically magical women and not even like people who were practicing like dark magic, but just really just anybody that you could just point a finger to and say that woman is a witch. And even if like she worked with herbs or whatever, you know, it was just any woman that was practicing any kind of healing art or even like, seduction or anything else, like even just not even just kind of like a woman living by herself or alone or something. There was, a lot of fear coming up, I think, for people then, just fearing that empowered woman and fearing the magical woman. And so obviously there's this huge wound in the feminine collective body when we talk about that, when we talk about the burning of the witches. So there's that. And then there's also the suppression of women's intuition and the ways of feminine living and the matriarchal ways and the ways of the feminine within a collective and within a community. And we live in a patriarchal society, and with a world dominated by men, we do things as a collective in the masculine way. And that has led to a lot of really toxic uh, behaviors and systems and uh, ways of leadership and leading people that do not serve everyone and especially that do not serve women. And, that kind of just leads right into women's rights and women's bodies and, these anti-abortion laws that are coming through in the United States and some states. And it's really, it's really crazy. There's been so much suppression of the feminine, of the divine feminine, and of our choice. And, women weren't even allowed to vote in the United States until pretty recently. And so, and in some countries, women are still extremely oppressed. And so we're not all the way there yet, where we haven't really healed this wound yet, which is why exactly why we're talking about this on our podcast today. Eliana, do you want to share a little bit more about this?
Yeah, some things that were just coming through were like simple things, like they took away our pockets so that we couldn't hide our
Yes.
persons. And, it seems like not such a big deal, but for a time when women were not allowed to have even their own little privacy in their wardrobe and not able to carry any of their tools with them or hold anything of their own value inside of their clothes, but inside of their body and inside of their experience. It really is just kind of like symbolic of the bigger picture of how they just stripped women from having any sort of container for themselves. And a wounded womb, like wounds creation, a wounded womb wounds creation, because
Mm.
all of life is born from the womb of a mother, from the womb of a woman. And we can probably point to many reasons why it was in the best interest of people that were seeking power to wound the feminine and therefore wound the womb that then wounds creation, because a lot of patriarchal ways is to keep things the same and keep us from not evolving and keep certain people that have been in power for eons in their place where they stand upon the backs of all. And so in this divine feminine healing conversation, it's like I really see it as moving from like the ways of the pyramid to the ways of the circle, where the woman and the family and the container of life is at the center of where we're sending our energy to, and that the masculine, or the masculine energy, the warrior energy, the go out there and get them energy, is kind of standing at the outside of that circle, holding the protective space, and that all they do is for the integrity of the wheel, or right, the integrity of the circle of humanity that they're surrounding and supporting and protecting. And right now it feels like women are like the ones standing at the front line fighting, and the men are just kind of like, not all men, but the certain men that were probably directing this conversation about are kind of standing at the middle, living their plush lives and not having to necessarily think about, fend for, or offer up anything to the collective frequency of the family, which to me is like also the collective frequency of the feminine. So I think it's, an important way to just see how we're tarnishing the female lines by putting them into places and spaces where they're so easily harmed. And, upon recording this podcast, like there's news from Iran that women are being prosecuted in horrendous ways, simply for standing up for their rights as women. So it's this very like, in America, we have women kind of talking about the abortion laws, and then across the country, we see that women are literally fighting just for their rights to exist. It's like we've gone past the can women be able to share and spread their magic to can women just make choices for their bodies, right? Can we just be in our feminine embodiment? Can we have children like we are meant to, or release children like we are meant to? Back in the day, like the women's work was the medicine work, and there was ways for women to receive abortions that weren't by the hands of man, that didn't have to be a part of this masculine medical system. And so it's like redirecting the energy back to the women to be able to make choices for themselves, so that they're able to then like be a clear and healed channel for all of creation to come through. So yeah, that was just kind of what came through when you were talking about those 2 points. Another thing that we wanted to kind of weave into this conversation was just the ways in which, women have been being brainwashed to think that they are too fat, too thin, need to get rid of all of the hair on their body and look like a child from the waist down. Um, the ways in which capitalism has been capitalizing on women's bodies and basically like our whole marketing system is kind of parading around the fact that they know that feminine energy is powerful and they manipulate it and use it and abuse it in order to create more profit and power for the patriarchy. It's like the patriarchy, whoever kind of created it, maybe not consciously, but they knew how powerful the woman was. That's why they attacked the woman and then started using the divine feminine frequency in order to promote their products. So it's really just this kind of like, on the one hand, a demonization of women's bodies, right? Like the women grow up feeling like they're not safe in their bodies, right? Because of ancestral mother line, but then also this societal programming. And then on top of that, we are then seeing that like our bodies and our sexuality and our femininity is being used to promote television shows. And it's like huge in Hollywood, right? Like they love to use the women, the feminine, to get their messages out there and to get their profits like ramped up. So yes, we're talking about all of these different layers here. And when we kind of like see how capitalism has been using the women's bodies, we can also see how that same system has been kind of segregating and separating us from being empowering frequencies for each other. And, women really work well when women work together. One of my favorite books that I ever read was The Red Tent. And, it's a fictional quote unquote story about like from a female's perspective from the Bible and how the women would go when they were at their times of bleeding and they would sit in the red tent and they would prophesize together. They would weave and they would crochet and they would make clothing for their communities, for their children's. And while they were doing this creative work, they would receive messages and guidance and information from spirit. And then they would come out, they would leave the red tent in this book. And the men, although they had been sitting in council, went to the woman for the ultimate counsel, for the spiritual counsel, to affirm or deny what the men thought was a good thing by receiving the codes from the woman's body of what actually was in harmony. And so, of course, that's like a fictional book, but it really, when I read it, like it felt like, oh yeah, I remember doing this. I remember being in this space where the matriarchy, the woman's work was honored and revered, and that men respected what women could do when they gathered together. And then somewhere along the way, it got perverted to realizing how powerful women were when they gathered and how can they keep us apart, keep us disliking one another, keeping us in fear of one another. And, I saw it really tangibly with my grandmother and my mom, like their fear of other women, their fear of powerful women, their fear of being around women that were too skinny or that were too pretty or that were separate from them. There was just this huge separation. And I believe that like our generation and those of us that are here to kind of recreate and rewrite this story are very much rewriting that programming for our mother lines and very much receiving new ways of being where we're opening our hearts to each other and realizing that like we can't do it alone. Like we really have to come together and kind of rise up as this collective divine feminine team, squad, if you will. So there was a couple other points that like we wanted to weave in, but I just want to hear, Holly, what you're feeling about those particular topics and then take us into the next ones.
Yeah, I mean, oof, yeah, we touched on a lot there. There's just so many aspects to this like feminine wound in our present culture. I really like, I love that you brought up the red tent. I love that book so much. It is such a beautiful telling of the women's mysteries. And I love how it's a female perspective of a biblical story, which the only side of the story you heard in the Bible was the man's story. his story. And that's all we've heard. Like that's all that's been recounted is his story. And so I love that this is kind of a look into like a peering into like what would have what was happening to the women. And that's kind of like this whole thing with like the Magdalene codes like reemerging and that, that they say that Yeshua was actually sitting in ritual with Mary Magdalene and who was a priestess. And that is where he got a lot of his downloads and his teachings that he shared with the world. So it's like we credit the man, but who are the women that he was hanging out with? Like he was hanging out with all of these like very spiritually connected, like priestess women. And so it just goes to show, there's this whole book, this whole sacred text that literally, there was so much happening, during, in those stories, in those times, and all that was recorded was the men's stuff, or all that was kept in the book, anyways, and recorded. And so, yeah, I think that there's just so much there, and I think that, you know, there has been this like competitive thread with amongst women for so long that has been perpetuated by the modern culture, the like the media, like in shows and TV shows and movies, like everything I watched growing up was very like one woman against another. And maybe she had like a bestie, like sidekick, but then like all the other girls were like, it's like a competition. And it's just like, I just remember so many movies and shows like that. It's like everything is just like, sending these messages to like young girls like compete, you need to compete, you need to be prettier than her, and then like all of the advertisements coming in saying that you need to wear our shapewear because you need to be thinner or you need to have like an hourglass figure and your figure isn't right the way it is, or it's not pretty, and you won't get you won't have friends, or you won't have this, you won't have your community, because it's like they know, I don't know, it's really sick and really twisted, and it's painful, and that's kind of what I think that's most of the. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to touch on too is just in the same realm of kind of like the modern day culture of just that, like, women, when a woman is like when a woman is empowered and making her choices from an empowered place and maybe having multiple sexual partners, um, she gets called a slut or a whore, and these really derogatory names. And there's a lot of judgment placed on her. You can see all the tales through history with that one. And then also, but the same type of man gets called like a playboy or a bachelor. Like that's how we do it. That's how men do, they like worship the playboy, all other boys like worship the playboy kind of in our modern culture. I'm not speaking about everybody here, but I'm just speaking culturally in the media, what's represented on television and shows. And I think it's getting a little bit better, but this is just kind of what we've grown up with, like our generation today. And even our body parts, like the slang words for our body parts, like if you look at the slang words for women's body parts, they're often really derogatory, and they're often kind of like gross or like ew, like. But and then you look at like the man's, like the slang for the man's genitalia is just like awesome and like powerful. And so even just seeing like in our language, it's in our language, these codes of like, you know, bringing down the feminine and lifting up the masculine, and it's really imbalanced. That's what it has become, and that's I think what people are talking about when they talk about toxic masculinity. That's kind of like a buzzword too that people have a lot of feelings about, I know, but I think when we talk about toxic masculinity, it's because it's become so like overpowered that it has become toxic in the collective, and we don't have as much embodied, empowered, femininity to match, to balance the masculine, to bring everything into union and to, to balance like the collective. And so I think what we're seeing right now is this huge imbalance, and this is just what we're talking about, I think, when we're saying divine feminine healing and what exactly we're healing from. Do we have anything else to add to that, Eliana?
Yeah, the only thing that was just coming through as you were saying that was just the fact that we all run masculine and feminine energy through
Mhm.
our bodies. So a war on the divine feminine is truly a war on everyone. It's not just on the woman, it's not just on the family, it's on the energy that if you're a man is running through your body right now. We have these two dynamic in Sanskrit they call it Ida and Pingala, but it's the masculine and the feminine. You can look at it as the solar or the lunar. You can look at it as literally your exhale and your inhale, right? Like that's how the masculine and feminine join, as one goes in, as one protrudes out, as one receives, right? And so it's this coherence and what Holly was talking about of the balance that we're seeking here. It's like when the feminine is in balance and we're polarized towards the masculine, the energy gets really stuck there, and energy wants to flow between the two. It wants to be able to breathe and to go back and forth. So that's in society, that's in our collective, and it's also in our bodies. So as we do this divine feminine healing and we free up some of this masculine polarization to be able to send some of that energy back into these feminine channels, like we are really bringing more coherence into the full spectrum of our beings, as men, as women, as any of the genders that you find in between. It's like we're seeing certain energies be polarized in the youth that's rising up now, because I believe things have been so extremely on one side that this new generation is like, well, we're going to fuck shit up then, we're going to come through and we're going to show you that we're not going to be stuck on one side or the other. We're going to be in the full spectrum of the human experience. And so they're kind of like showing these like tangible, embodied ways in which our energy is just trying to refine its balance. So if you're, listening to this podcast and you don't necessarily relate to divine feminine, like we're not just talking here about like the the woman that can stare into your eyes a really long time and be with her sensuality and her sexuality. Like we're not just talking about that, like, because even that to me feels a little bit toxic. Like even the divine feminine kind of conversations that you see a lot on social media feel like they're still abiding by kind of like patriarchal ways and patriarchal goals of like we have to diminish the masculine and we have to cut the masculine down and we have to burn the patriarchy. It's like that's still a masculine energy, and that's still causing war on a part of us that is alive and well in each one of our bodies. So in this divine feminine conversation, it's like we don't need to put divine feminine under one pink rosy role, right? Like the divine feminine can be just as much in her power and just as much in her masculine, and a man can be just as much in his feminine as a woman can. Of course, they express in different ways, but yeah, that was just something that kind of channeled through when you were talking, was just that we were talking about the feminine energy that flows through all things. It's like the creator of all things, and she can get a little bit angry when we don't give her the time and place. It's like that Kali Ma energy, of like that she can really come in and destroy. She's the creator, the sustainer, and the destroyer. And she can come in and change things if she really wants to, but she's inviting in an opportunity for us as human beings to start respecting all sides of our being, all sides of who we are. So that's what I had to say about that. Was there anything that popped into your head now?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love that you said just what you were saying about like the masculine and how, you know, it really is like we have them both within us. And I think that growing up, like when I grew up, like it was not okay for men to show their feminine side. Like it still wasn't okay. Like this is a really recent thing that has come out of our culture in the millennial kind of culture, is this like is LGBTQ plus community. Like that did not exist like when we were in grade school and high school. Like it was just kind of starting to emerge. and then it just blew up. It was like once social media really blew up and people were like, oh, there's other people like me and like these communities like connected, then there's just been so much more awareness and so much growth. It feels, and especially with where we live, I think when we live in Portland, Oregon, and it's it has a very healthy LGBTQ plus community, and it's very culturally accepted here for men to embody and express their feminine energy in pretty much any way they want to. And I love that, and it's so beautiful. But that was not the case, and it's still not the case in other parts of this country, even. And in other parts of the state, it's still not culturally acceptable. So I know it really depends on where you live. But, so I wanted to just mention that, that's something that we're still working on as a collective is for men to be able to even address that they do have feminine energy in their body. And it's okay for them to express in a feminine way and still like be more masculine or be masculine embodied, um, and to be straight or whatever, and not, you know, so there's there's just so much there. And um I also was talking to my cousin a while ago. She lives on the East Coast, and she is in the tech world over on the East Coast, and she's saying that she feels like she has to show up in a more masculine way to be accepted and to be taken seriously in that world, and that she's really not liking that and that it's not feeling authentic to her. And I was talking to her and I was saying, why can't women show up as women? Like if you are a woman and you feel like your feminine energy and you feel more feminine dominant in your body, then why can't you express that? Like why did she feels like she has to, like, I don't know, like lower her voice or change the way she speaks and how she is, like it changes her authenticity, for acceptance and in this kind of man's world. And I think that is like that's like not the point of feminine empowerment. It's like, yes, like we've made so much progress. Like you have this job in this man's world and you're getting paid the same as all these men, but like you're still having to act like like, you're still having to like put that bro energy out to get respect in your job and in that community. And that I feel like it's sad to hear that that still exists, but that is a thing too, that like women, like we should have the right to show up in our full femininity and not have to alter the way we speak, not have to alter the way that we dress. We could be able to dress more feminine, professional, but still feminine. And and the same with men. So it's like it's interesting how I feel like this new generation that's coming in right now is like we're breaking it all down. Like I love that you said that, Eliana, because I really feel like there's still all these in our generation. There's still all these like things like, oh yeah, men can't do that and women can't do that and women have to, and then the youth is just like, no, we have transcended gender. And I love that. So I feel like it's going in a really good direction, and I think that there is a lot of divine feminine healing happening and divine masculine healing happening. There's a lot more people, a lot more communities sitting in men's circles, sitting in women's circles, and remembering the ancient magic and really cultivating uh, and amplifying and healing those two energies.
Yeah.
So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting that you brought up like somebody on the East Coast because I remember, I've grown up on the West Coast. I've done most of my psychedelic trips on the West Coast, but I did travel a couple years ago to the East Coast for a festival, and I think it was in Virginia actually, and it was a bluegrass festival. It was it was a very white festival. There was like not much diversity. There was not a whole lot of women there, and I went on a journey that night and I spent the entire night crying about the fact that the masculine was still so rampant and that there wasn't any feminine, and I could just feel, you know, being so sensitive and kind of opening up the energies, I could really feel that the masculine energy, just even in that land, just had so much pain and wounding. And you know, being someone that has grown up in a very, like, I feel like the West Coast is very yin and the East Coast is very yang. Like for some reason, it's like they're 3 hours ahead of us. So they've had to like go a little bit faster than we have. They've had to like be a little bit more in charge of their lives. And we're over here like, well, we got 3 extra hours of sunlight. You know, if we all find out the same news at the same time, like we get 3 extra hours to process it in the day. And so going over there and just really like being, and I was with an amazing group of men who are doing a lot of work to do their own healing. And yet even still, I could just feel the toxicity of the masculine energy just running through the ley lines of that state, and where I was in that state. Like I can't generalize for anywhere else but this festival. But it was interesting because it was just like my journey became then this full like tear shedding, like a very feminine experience where I was just fully in my emotions. And that was how I was balancing that frequency. That's how I was like bringing the coherence of even like our group and our circle back into some sort of like feminine counterpart. And then it was, you know, an interesting journey because later on that night, the two other women that I was with, there was five of us, I guess, but they also got the call that more feminine energy needed to be brought in. So they came at the end of the night with flower petals, rose petals, and they were like sprinkling them all over the men. And, you know, they were being so cute about it. And then the men, like their immediate reaction was like, don't make a mess. Like we need to clean this up. And though there was like beer bottles and things around on the floor, like they got a broom just to sweep up the flower petals, you know? And it was just this kind of interesting thing to watch, like being in a psychedelic realm, to see just like how much like we are unconsciously just running these energies through our bodies, and that we're kind of sometimes predisposed to them just based on where we live or what our family lines were, or even just whatever land, you know, whatever astrocartography like lines from the sky that we've, you know, attuned to and landed upon on our journeys. So yeah, that was like a little bit off topic, but just like also alluding to what you were saying, that, you know, it's like we are very lucky where we live, that we have an opportunity and a privilege to be able to talk about these things. And going right outside of Portland, it is a very different story with a very different vibe. Going right outside the West Coast, it's a very different story with a very different vibe. Going outside the United States, a very different story, very different vibe. So just kind of like inviting all of that in, and recognizing like that there's so many different experiences that people are having on the earth at this time. And we're, you know, hoping that this conversation is kind of an anchor for the feminine to come through even more, to channel herself into this conversation, to anyone that's listening, and also like a channel for this message to find its way back kind of through society in places and spaces like this, where we do have the freedom to talk about this, where we do have a little bit more leniency in our lives and in our communities to be ourselves and to express ourselves. And just hoping that like the message becomes the medicine that can seep through some of this toxicity and really kind of transmute it into something that can be of service to all beings. So, Holly, maybe you can shift us into the next part of our topic if you don't have anything to say about that, where we're going to kind of talk about some ways in which we can heal from the wounds that have been done to the feminine.
Yes. Okay. So, yes, ways to heal the divine feminine within and without, too, in the culture also. So when Eliana and I were kind of creating this podcast, we were really inspired to talk about one of the ways that we both have really experienced and really have had amplified divine feminine experiences through this modality, this practice, I guess, and that has been belly dance. And there is just so much magic. I would really say that I know we were specifically practicing belly dance together and kind of with a group of friends. And um, I really think that it's kind of like any kind of dance with women. I feel like is so magical and so beautiful and so powerful, but definitely specifically belly dance also. There's some really beautiful, magical, ancient wisdom codes, ancient women's wisdom codes contained within the practice of belly dance. And oof, yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start on this topic because I feel like it's just so it's just been so empowering. And so, like, I think that with any kind of like physical practice, you really get to tap into the wounds within your own body. And, like, we were speaking about a collective feminine wound or a like collective like womb wound. So belly dance, you're moving your hips a lot. You're it's kind of like addressing the womb. And this was a dance that women would do together in women's circles and you know pregnancies and new beings come in through the womb and they come in through these women's circles as well. And so it's this kind of like dance that is very womb focused. Like a lot of the practices within it and the like the hip circles and just the hip movements really bring a lot of blood flow to the womb, and they can really help to move and shift things if there's anything like stuck or any kind of like um, pathology there. It can really just start to kind of address those and can help like just bring more blood flow and bring more of your awareness and more of your attention and more of your intention into that space and can really be profoundly uh, healing for your own womb and for those feminine codes that have impacted you personally. I think that pretty much every woman I've talked to has had some kind of womb wound or wound through their masculine or non-consensual touch or whatever it is. I feel like when stuff like that happens, it's stored in the womb. And even not even just our own bodies and our own lives, but the womb wounds of our mothers and our mothers' mothers and of just women all around. Like we are connected, we're all connected. So when one woman heals, it can start to spread. So this is a really beautiful practice to really like physically drop into your womb. And not only that, but there's something just so magical and so like ecstatic about looking around, about learning a dance together and then dancing it and then looking around while you're dancing and realizing and feeling that you're all moving together and like and understanding where your body goes in the space of the collective. It's like you become like this hive mind. It's like you almost become like a swarm, like those fish that just kind of they just all swarm together and they like magically just know how to go and they move as one. It's like when you're dancing with a group of women, it just feels like you become this collective, and it's just so beautiful and so you really just you feel connected, you feel so deeply connected, and it's really therapeutic because we don't really get a lot of that in our daily lives. So yeah, so I would say like one way to work with your divine feminine healing would be belly dance and ritual dance and really like women's embodiment. I know somebody who goes to like an all women's gym, and she said that has just changed her workout reality. She's also on the East Coast, and she's just like, I cannot go to any of the gyms around here. Got to do the all women's, having that all women's space to just be able to like move your body in a way that you're not feeling like somebody's looking at you or that you're going to get shamed by somebody. It's also like a specifically set container to amplify women and raise women up, and like instead of having to worry about like, oh, somebody's looking at me and judging me, it's like in this container that's like, no girl, like we got you. Like, we're gonna lift you up and you're working hard over there. I see you. And instead creating a culture of women supporting women. So, do you want to share anything about those kind of more embodiment practices, Eliana?
Yeah, totally. I love that too, because it's just like some of the things you were saying. It's like we dance like not for anyone's sexuality, but our own. And I think
Yeah.
that dance for so long was like at least performed in my eyes when I was younger as like the dance you dance for the man, right? You dance to be sexual so the men can find you in the club. That was kind of before I grew up and realized that I don't want any men touching me in the club. But yeah, I remember, Holly and I met actually in belly dance and in women's ritual work. And I think we're very lucky because we found a teacher up here that her dedication was to like tantric yoga and like bringing the divine feminine or bringing energy in general, bringing spirituality into the body. And she built kind of her programs and her containers on it being women's work and it being ritual for the woman and for the divine feminine. And she was very connected to, and we'll put her in the show notes. I think it's important to shout her out. But she really set the intention for the work that we did to connect to the divine mother, right? And she would have us chanting like Jai Ma, and she would be teaching us about the ancient goddesses and the ancient mothers, and she wove them into her practice. So when we were dancing, it was like she was kind of invoking and calling in like the dances from all of the ages, like the ancient dances, the dances that the women have been doing throughout all time, and then and asking us and inviting us to embody these beings in different ways. And I remember once before one of our ritual performances, like I think she was talking to me when she said this, but she was saying, just doing yoga is not going to prepare you for this dance ritual. Like you need to dance, you need free flowing movement. And I didn't really put two and two together until she kind of called that out, that, yoga and a lot of the movement that we do is still very masculine. Like yoga is on a linear plane. You're not shaking out your hips. You're not really shaking out anything. You're following set instructions. It's very kind of like in the army with like somebody calling out ways to move your body and telling you what to take next and what to do next. And there's really no invitation to just kind of feel your flow and like be in your sensuality and really feel or let the body, I guess, inform the movement rather than like an outside source, whether that's the teacher, or whether that's, this beautiful practice of yoga to inform your movement for that day. And so, I was a yoga teacher. I was so into the yoga. And then I started dancing and realizing that like there was this other movement that my body was craving that it wasn't getting by going to the gym, that it wasn't getting by teaching or doing any of the forms of yoga. There was an energy that was locked up in my sacral that wasn't going to come out until I shimmied it out, and I loved that our teacher like really gave us like, you're shimmying to clear energy, you're doing this to move energy. Like it became a very energetic space for movement and not just a physical one. And I think that's also something with the feminine is like the feminine does need its masculine boundaries because the feminine is like in free flow, right? The feminine like really wants to move and wants to shake and wants to shimmy. And it's really it's a really about the energy and the experience of like drawing energy into the body and seeing how you can play with spirit within your own embodiment rather than like very masculine practices. The masculine ways are channeling the energy up. It's like, how can we get up into the higher chakras? How can we ascend? How can we like leave this earth and not care about the destruction that we leave behind it? Like how can we escape samsara? Like all these ways in which we're channeling energy up and out of the body and really like disassociating from our root and from our sacral and from these very earthbound feminine energy centers that are in our body. So yeah, I just like loved being in that dance ritual space where it was like everything we were doing was just invoking energy into the body, learning how to move the energy in the body and really like letting the body express the feelings and express the templates of either ancient cultures or like the future initiations and intentions that we were calling in. And so, yeah, this is like a call out that's like if you're doing a yoga practice and you're like, I'm not really experiencing that, like you might need to shimmy, you might need to roll your belly, like you really might need to kind of find some nice like infinity symbols with your hips so that you can start to feel the energy and the power that lives within your womb. And that takes time and it takes deconditioning. And it does a lot of times take a safe container of women to feel like you're allowed to move in that way without judgment, without fear, without, you know, persecution. So there's plenty of like beautiful online spaces that are popping up if you're somewhere that doesn't have access to an amazing belly dance teacher or group women's ritual work. But also just turning on music and like really letting your body kind of show you how it wants to move and getting a little shimmy in is a good kind of place to start.
Yes, yes. I love that you said that because I really came from a yoga background also. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of our listeners, like yoga is so popular. Like most people have tried a yoga class now, at least where we live. And probably like beyond this world. I think that our listeners, most of our listeners have probably tried yoga before, but um it is, yeah, it is so masculine and it's funny because this whole, yeah, the whole way that you're moving your body when you dance, it's so feminine. And it's like we've gotten all these codes from like the yogis and like the men bringing all of these like yogic codes to the US. Um, we were talking about that in our Ayurveda podcast, which is coming out soon. And but we yeah, I feel like this kind of movement is really a reclamation of the feminine flow just in how we move. Like and really like anchoring it into our bodies and anchoring it into the field and like the grid that we're moving through and like the air that we're dancing with and moving around and playing with. And it's playful too. That's another thing I love. It's not so rigid, like you were saying, like no one's barking orders at you when you just listen to your body and move. It is like that's such a beautiful, like just dichotomy or yeah, just the dichotomy of that. It's really, really beautiful. And um oh, I was also going to mention too, you were saying like the masculine energy and like how can we like the masculine like goal, like the yogis would kind of like, what is the word when you renounce? You renounce, you go live on the mountain and you rise above the world and you kind of disassociate and you go all the way up through your crown chakra and you connect to God's source and that's all you do. And that is transcendence. That's what transcendence is, air quotes. And then um the more feminine path is the tantric path, like the way of the householder, the way of the like, because I love that like tantra emerged in this way that was like, well, what about all the people who can't just go like live on a mountain? The people who are like having families, like, do they not get to connect to source also? And then it's like, okay, then this feminine path came through of like, ooh, we can transcend while we are ultimately present in life, like while staying ultimately present, we can find ecstasy in this present moment and in during the path, like through the path of the householder, like being a mother, working a job to support your family or to support yourself, and just like, you know, you can find divinity in that path as well. And I think that we're really starting to kind of like steer the ship in a different way, and it reminds me of like the all those rich guys who like want to just abandon the earth and like go to Mars and just leave the earth to shit. It's like that's like so on theme for this conversation. Just like okay, where you could fully participate in this world and this society and that's where we live right now. But yeah, anyways.
Yeah, it's like
So
the
yeah.
new age
Mhm.
transcendence, right? Like, well, let's just go to Mars. We won't worry about anything if we just leave this planet and then leave everybody else to clean up our mess.
Yeah, totally. Ugh, so silly. Okay, so if we are going to get back on track, um, so dance, women's embodiment, give it a try. It's awesome. Um, another another way that we have done a lot of divine feminine healing is through just women, so women's circles in general we've talked a little bit about, but also through like transformational festivals and big, like there's so many festivals now, like you can go to, there's like Shakti festivals and like all women's festivals and women's circles within festivals. Ugh, and like I know that Envision one year they had a red tent uh circle, and I know that that's been popping up around a lot of West Coast festivals as well, just this like safe container for women to come and to hold sacred ceremony. And when, oh my gosh, sitting in some of those circles, you can feel the ancient codes coming in of just like, yes, we've done this before. And it's really reclaiming this practice. And I feel that it is really also holding this like grid point for the world of feminine healing and really kind of like casting that spell and sending that vibration out into the field for the collective.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I'm even thinking of just like yoga teacher trainings that I did that were just only women, ones that weren't necessarily like called women circles or like for women circles, but like because the fact that women gathered and set an intention of being trained in a certain way or reaching a certain goal, just like the amount of transformation that happens, like whether it's intended to or not, like most of these people like show up for these trainings and then they sit in circle and it's like their lives outside of the circles oftentimes crumble, like relationships fall away. My first teacher training, I think 80% of the women either got a divorce, their wedding was called off, they broke up with their partner, they cheated, like moved across the country, like all this stuff happened with these relationships. And I even experienced it with my relationship of this huge kind of sacral release that had to happen with me and my partner for us to get to a place of more harmony and balance. And so it was like nobody showed up for that. And yet, like when you sit in a circle of women, it's like this like soul contracted, like, okay, we're creating this safe container. We're like weaving our threads of energy together and we're holding this kind of greater channel, right? It's like alone we are a channel, but like when we kind of weave and work into a circle with other women's, it's like opening up this grandiose channel for energy to come in. And if the lives outside of that are not like in line or in balance with what is asking to be transformed through this set intention that is created, things get shaken up in the world around you. And so I think like there's some aspect of that that's like we can feel the power of a women's circle or a women's festival before we even go, because it's like once you commit and once you say yes to having that experience, like you will be invited to change, you will be invited to embody more of your feminine energy, your life around you will be really asked to transform with you. And if it can't, right, if there's masculine energy in your life that just is refusing to go with you on the journey, if there's anything in your life that is out of alignment of you receiving more of those feminine codes, like it's going to show itself to you. It's going to sometimes be big tower moments, where things have to really break down in order for you to rebuild. So I think like there's like simultaneously like a urge from maybe not every woman, but from a lot of the women that we know, at least that happened with us, that like welled up inside to like that called us forth to these experiences. And yet like I can say from experience that like you can feel the energy when you're going into something like this, because it will transform you. Like women's circles transform you, they remind you of the old ways, they embody more of your energy, they change the flow of energy, from always being output, like the masculine ways of energy, to being able to receive and input some energy and input some new codes and update some systems. I shouldn't say update because that still feels masculine, but download some systems that are in more alignment to the feminine that is now kind of flowing into the circles and the spaces that are created. So um yeah, and like, you know, Holly and I were also talking about just like regular girl time, you know, like that it doesn't necessarily have to be a circle or a training or a festival or something that you go to. It simply could just be about like creating more of like a tribe with the women around you and doing more of the intuitive, like intentional space holding for you to gather and hold space for one another's experiences and hear and witness each other. And Holly had like a really great analogy for this part, so I'm going to pass it back to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like whenever I think of like girl time, I always just think of like Sex in the City and like Carrie Bradshaw and her whole little crew of like her like weekly brunch get together with the girls that she like always showed up for. I mean, it's like every episode they're sitting at brunch together. And I love that like it doesn't girl time or like women's time it doesn't have to look like, you know, sitting in a circle and passing around a smudge stick and feathers and, you know, chanting together. Like it can just be really relaxed and it can just be like going and grabbing a bite together and just catching up and sharing space and holding space and laughing and playing and, you know, just friendship. Like friendship with other women is so important, you know. There's another great show that kind of embodies that message. I think it's called Dollface. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's so cute. It's about this girl and she like has this boyfriend for a couple years and she completely like loses like she just stops talking to all of her friends and then he dumps her and then she comes crawling back to her friends and they're all upset because like well you left you were you know and I feel like it's such a classic story like you know we forget about our girlfriends sometimes when we get really like close with a boy or a partner you know and it's like I think just like I love that these like examples in our culture are really kind of like supporting just friendship with other women, you know, because I think for so long it was the opposite that the media was kind of promoting like competition. So I love that. And that leads me to another great way to heal the feminine wound is to like be aware of like the media and the shows and the programming that you're consuming about this kind of stuff. You know, if you're consenting to watching and to consenting to taking in these things via television that you're not actually okay with or actually resonating with, just be aware that it's kind of a brainwashing tool. I mean, that's like literally the science behind advertisement is brainwashing. Like, look it up. It's a science. It's a science. They even the things that they flash at you, the timing of it, like everything is so calculated in a commercial to get you to buy that product, to get you to have a need that needs to be fulfilled. And so, you know, these different like shows and these different forms of media programming, you know, they have agendas sometimes that don't really align with who we are. And so, you know, just being particular and being discerning about what we are taking in energetically via social media, even, and just any kind of media that is unsupportive of women's rights or the feminine body or anything like that, I feel like, nope, that doesn't get to come into my field. What
I
do you have to say
also,
about that?
I was just going to say, I also love sometimes watching things for the simple act of getting to not consent. Like, I love watching shows sometimes where I'm like, oh, I shouldn't be watching this. Like, this is programming me in whatever way or causing fear in my field. And then it like almost attunes me into the fact that like there's some part of my mission that is here to watch those things and say, I do not consent out loud. Like,
Mm,
I'm going to receive what you're trying to put out there and I'm going to return that energy back to whoever created it for them to deal with the energy themselves. And I am not consenting to that being a living experience in my reality. So I also wanted to just throw that other side of the coin in there too, that if you are watching something and you're like, oh shit, I shouldn't be watching this, um, it is an opportunity for you to call out to the universe, like, we do not consent to this anymore. We are changing the paradigms. Like, you and your consciousness, we and our consciousness is so incredibly powerful. And the one thing on earth is that we have free will here. But for so long, we were brainwashed to not understand that or recognize that about ourselves or be able to claim that for ourselves. So part of this awakening as women, as, doing the divine feminine work, is remembering that, like, your words are your wand, and like your oh, there's a word I'm trying to think of here, but the way that you are affirming or denying things in your life is informing the way that reality is being created from you and around you, right? Like we said earlier, like a wounded womb wounds creation. But can you imagine what a community, a collective, a world of healed wombs can create, right? And it's like, so it starts here. It starts in our bodies. It starts by consenting to and agreeing upon, or not consenting to, what is showing up right in front of us in our field. So a beautiful way to do that without actually having to like go out into the world and experience a horrendous atrocity happening to you is to witness the programming on social media that is manifesting a creation of that horrendous experience, and stopping it in its tracks and returning it back to sender and saying, no, like, we no longer consent to this. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that tool with us. I'm going to use that now because that's happened to me like too often where I'm watching something and I'm like, God, why? Like things are so graphic nowadays. It's just like it's really like it's kind of traumatizing a lot of times watching like intent like not even like thrillers or like scary movies or like, it's like even just like a regular like action film or like a regular like drama. It's just like there's just so much violence in all of the media now. It's just crazy that it really does give people secondhand trauma. And what are we gonna do with it? It's like great, now I'm processing this thing. Like I'm already stressed out. I was trying to chill out. Now I'm processing this trauma and this pain that's not mine.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's such an empowering practice to be like, just say, like, I do not consent and to send it back to that person who created that. I love that because it's really not ours. Like, if we didn't know that that was going to be that was a part of the deal when we hit play, like, then we would not have watched it. So it's like, yeah, thanks for sharing that tool. I know I'm going to use that.
Yeah, and we can like take that even further too to the next point that we were going to discuss, which is that like your social media specifically is something that you really do have control over. And the people that you are following and the content that you're taking in from other people, like we're talking a lot about the demonization from the media and from Hollywood and movies and things like that. But also like your Instagram, your social media, like your podcast, like the things that you are listening to are informing your being all the time. And so if you're following women on social media that are not lifting up other women, or you're following accounts that are not really honoring the divine feminine, or you're giving a lot of attention and energy to other women that, even if they are promoting divine feminine practices or that they are uplifting other women, but you leave just feeling bad about yourself afterwards because you feel like you need to level up and be like them, or you feel like you're not as pretty as they are, or you haven't accomplished as much as them, like that's a good sign for you to unfollow them. And like you have the permission to do that, right? It's not gonna, I mean, maybe it'll hurt some people's feelings, but probably those accounts are not really looking to see if you're following them or not. They're just women in their power, probably doing their thing. So just also like being intentional about like creating the spaces, like both in your lived reality and also in the things that you're consuming on the media, to only really be receiving like women uplifting other women, or like women's empowerment accounts, and like permission given to like follow someone for a while and then realize that they're not in resonancy with you anymore, and letting them, unfollow into the old timeline, like being really conscious just about what you are following. Like literally when you're liking things, when you're scrolling into things, I see social media sometimes as I'm scrolling on Instagram and I'm like, oh, I can feel the energy of just like me moving up and like all of that energy moving into my psyche. And I'm just like creating this wheel that
Mm.
pours in, and then my fingers move it around. And when you're liking something, like that is a energetic consent. When you're saving something, you're saving that in your library's mainframe, in your Akashic mainframe. So your socials are not like outside of your energy, like they're very much intertwined and connected with your energy. So being super aware of what you are taking in from other people, from average Joes or average Judiths, I want to say, but we know a Judith, so that feels weird to say that. um, but yeah, and just like letting yourself like be able to consent to also these social medias, and like even people that you feel are your friends, like if they're not making you feel good at the end of the day by what they're posting, like you don't have to consume that. I think that's a big thing with women. It's like we've really been conditioned to feel like we have to consume it all, right? I think that's why there's like a lot of eating disorders really rampant in female bodies, is because like we're taught to just like consume everything, whether it's toxic, whether it's abuse, whether it's non-consensual, and just take it into our bodies. And there's no permission or many resources on how to compost it, how to get rid of it, how to return it back to wherever it came from. We're just kind of these like, we have this womb, we have this like feminine essence that holds energy, and people capitalize off of that. Like there is a system that is capitalizing off of the fact that we can hold a lot of energy in our bodies, and that we can transform that energy into other things. But if we're constantly consuming without the kind of fire needed within us to transmute it and transform it into something else, if it's not healthy for us, then that becomes like a really integrated embodied trauma that just then lives and informs our reality. And we'll get into the cards that I pulled for all of this soon, but I think actually that's why probably the vulture card came up, that is reminding us that for just so long, like we as women have just been kind of consuming the darknesses of this world and consuming the toxicity of this world and cleaning up a lot of the destruction and disease and death that has been perpetuated on the woman's body, on the woman, the body that is the earth, right? Like the earth is so feminine, like she's just this feminine frequency, and she's also received a lot of the wounding and the toxicity and the harm that has been non-consensual done to her as well. So yeah, I think that that's like why the vulture wanted to kind of play a role in this conversation of just saying that like we also get to decide what we're consuming, and we don't have to be the martyrs anymore. We don't have to be the saviors. Like we as women can really just start to clean up our own fields first, right? And like then let other people start to do their work, whether that's men or other women that haven't been doing their own work, other people, other beings, and encouraging them, right? Sending that energy back to sender is encouraging them to do their own work, to do their own cleansing, to clean up their own yard. And that feels really important to like call out, and just to say here is that like we don't have to consume all of the hardships and all of the pain and all of the trauma in the world. Like here's your permission to not have to martyr the world into healing or martyr your body into healing. Like you really do get to be in your empowered masculine and your empowered feminine, and consent to what it is that you would like to be receiving and consuming. And of course there's nuances, like I'm saying this like that you have the power to consent, and there's been many situations with women that they've and men and everybody that they've not been able to consent to things. And so honoring that, and in this conversation that is happening in a safe container, if you're listening to this, you've entered into this container that we've created. And so it's consenting and not consenting to the things that are already right in front of you. Like you consented to be on social media, you consent to listen to this, you consent to watch these things or read these things or take in certain news feeds. So just starting where you're at and recognizing that like those little maneuvers of like claiming your space and owning what you will take in and what you won't take in is like that's going to perpetuate new cycles. Like that's going to start the wheel turning in new directions.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like, everything you're saying just comes back to like our awareness is our most powerful tool for rebellion against this toxic masculinity dominated culture. So, and just against like the the kind of mainstream culture oppression. It's also like a rebellion against oppression in general, oppression of all people, not just the feminine, but also all people who are oppressed. Like our awareness is our most powerful tool. So where you put your energy, where you focus your energy is so important. And if it does, like you were saying, if you do see something and your awareness is brought to something that you do not consent to, say it out loud, do your practice, and then return to sender and then turn to what you do want to see. Turn your attention and allow your attention to magnify the beauty and magnify healing and magnify femininity in its balance and in its empowerment. And so yeah, I love everything you were saying about that. And I feel that the more that we really are aware of where our energy is going and where our awareness is going and the things we're paying attention to, the more we can stop taking on other people's bullshit. And the more we can stop consuming everything. You know, we're such receptive, women's bodies are naturally receptive, more receptive. Femininity is a more receptive energy. And so there are so many things that women take on for the world and, you know, and pain and pain that we take on, ancestral pain and, you know, all this pain and trauma that can live inside of us. We need to, yeah, have more systems to be able to release it and to be able to turn our attention and our intention elsewhere. So yeah. Why don't we get into the reading next? We'll kind of switch gears here. Eliana, you did a reading for us about what's kind of coming through, what wants to come through this message, this sacred container that we've created together um, to our listeners about divine feminine healing.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. So it was interesting when I did the spread, I felt like the cards that were showing up were really masculine. I got the Black Dragon from Saturn, and then I pulled another card that was also talking about Saturn. Oh, lead. I pulled lead and it was talking about Saturn. I was like, wow, Saturn is like the father, right? Like it's supposed to be this like really strong masculine. But what I found really interesting when I actually read about the Black Dragon from Saturn was that it said black indicates a feminine energy of rest, peace, and calm, which enables the wisdom to come forward. It could not do so if there was too much masculine thrust. So I really
Oh,
loved that like little I mean the black dragon from Saturn is like brings you wisdom through spiritual discipline, concentrate, focus on your ultimate vision. And I think that, you know, it's like we're talking about the divine feminine. And also, like we alluded to this at the beginning, that the feminine does need the masculine. Like the feminine is in free flow. The feminine can just like follow her intuition all day and just be in whatever feels good in the moment. And to channel like real action and to take real, like disciple devotion towards something that you really believe in, like it does require a masculine channel to send that feminine energy through. And so I love kind of actually that Saturn showed up to be like, we work together. And though like I've got kind of got a bad name for myself as being this domineering male role, that like I also want to help the feminine to flow, that I also want to help this spiritual energy to ground in on earth. And I pulled the card lead, and lead is very much like a grounding, anchoring force. And it really like it weighs down the reading, is what the card says. And it's that same like channel of energy, which is that like we're not talking about transcending the patriarchy or ascending out of earth or leaving our bodies and trying to find the spiritual, you know, liberation that the masculine teachings have been kind of pervading into our field. And instead, it's like, how can we bring in Saturn energy all the way down to our root? Like, how can we bring in these cosmic forces of intelligence down through our chakra systems, like down the ladder into the earth and into this field where then we can actually use some of these powerhouses to plant seeds of new awareness and to grow new fertile soils. So it's kind of like this beautiful message of like, though it might look like the divine feminine is just like here to eat grapes and to belly dance and to like be in her flow, like she has like a really sacred mission, and her mission is very much aligned with the divine masculine. Like they go hand in hand, they work together. And as we kind of recreate our intention and energy around the feminine, like we also in that same resonance get to recreate the energy around the masculine, where Saturn doesn't have to be always this domineering like tower moment in your life. That instead, if we can use Saturn in flow with the feminine, that like we can receive that spiritual discipline from that planet or from that force or from that, you know, like father masculine archetype, to be in service to the earth, to be in service to the feminine, to like hold the sacred circle with the divine portals of the seeds at the center so that they can really grow. And that was another card that I pulled, like was the seed. And I think I read it today, and I'm pretty sure it was one of my teacher's emails that came through Pilar Lesko, where she said, like, do we have to always be so worried about how the seed is going to grow? Like, can't we just be planting our seeds and just allow the seed to do what it naturally knows how to do, which is to grow into the thing that was like implanted inside of it? And then the mask and the riddle came up too. So it's like we're planting seeds of awareness into the field of this podcast, into the readers, just like create new sprouts of possibility in your lives. And with that comes, like, with that growth comes the growing pains that sometimes ask you to shed the mask of what you thought femininity had to look like, or what you thought balanced masculine and femme was supposed to be. And instead recognize that, like, in the divine feminine and finding her healing, that's when we find the full spectrum of our being. And we can put on different masks and we can play different roles, and we can be in the fluid, like, feeling sensations of what we want to embody that day, and not be so stuck in a linear rut or a linear pathway that the masculine is kind of in charge of. And then the final card that came through was the riddle. And it was just like life is such a riddle, right? And like the most important thing that we can remember is that, like, all of this has been purposed, right? Like, for whatever reason, like, we as souls, maybe like not some of us that are here, because I think like a lot of us that are here have come from a lot of different planets to be like, oh yeah, what's happening on earth is not going to cut it anymore. Like, we need to like raise her into her next paradigm. But that, like, there was some aspect of like wanting to see what a strong masculine force could look like on planet earth, and then what it's going to look like when the feminine gets to rise up from within that. And like, we're getting to witness that here and now, just in our culture and in our ways of living, that the feminine is like showing how she breaks down boundaries and how she breaks walls, and how there's a lot of chaos and destruction in that as well. But she's recreating the energy so that we can grow in a new way. So I love the riddle card, because it's always just like, you think you know, but you don't really know. And like, it's okay not to know how to do this or what to do, but simply to just kind of follow the mysterious origins of these ancient feminine lines and see where they lead, and see where, you know, the past wants to inform the future, and the future then gets to inform the past. So yeah, I hope that was like a good debrief of the messages that came through. Was there anything that popped into your head while I was saying all that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I love the dragon card that you pulled, and the Saturn card felt like super resonant and interesting with the divine feminine healing and how that ties in. And um yeah, it's funny when you were talking about that, I was reminded of like in the Wheel of Time series. I've been reading the Wheel of Time, and it's such a good series, listeners. If if you need a series, it's amazing. Wheel of Time. Um, in this book series, like there's these witches, they're called Aes Sedai. They also have a show about the Wheel of Time. Um, the Aes Sedai, and they have their warders, they have their masculine counterparts. And so when the Aes Sedai are weaving their spells and like casting their weaves, they it takes time, it takes time and it takes intention and it takes like their energy. And so they are vulnerable when they're doing that. So if they are weaving a spell and it's taking all of their attention and their focus, then they have like their warder who has their back and protects their energy and protects their sacred energy and protects their work and protects what they're doing. And so I feel like I love that. I feel like this black dragon really makes me think of the warder and the role of the warder within that Aes Sedai warder partnership and how, and within the divine feminine and divine masculine partnership and how, that's kind of how it used to be is that in the matriarchal systems, the women were the leaders and the women's would sit in women's circle and the men would protect the communities and they would protect the families and the children. And, we've kind of like lost our protectors, and our protectors are now our leaders, and they're not our protectors. There's no protectors anymore. So, I just love that. And like with the Saturn energy, um, it's interesting. Like Saturn feels for some reason so aligned to the feminine, especially in my life. I came into my mother's life during her Saturn return. And then during my Saturn return, I birthed my daughter, which was also my mother's second Saturn return, while I was in my first Saturn return, birthing my daughter. So it's like three generations where we'll always just kind of share that Saturn return every 28 or 30 years or whatever. So, um, yeah, yeah, it's interesting that Saturn has that kind of feminine relation to it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the wheel of time because had come through multiple times as you were talking earlier in the conversation. It definitely wanted to be woven in for whatever reason. Um, I mean, for whatever reason, it's like a very powerful show about very powerful women, very powerful book about very powerful women. And
Yeah.
and yeah, and the Saturn after my Saturn return was when my mom passed. After my cousin's Saturn return was when her mom passed. So there definitely is something there with Saturn helping us to align the feminine energies and help things that are ready to flow in, and help things that are ready to flow out, flow out. So I love that you called attention to that. All right. So I think we're at the end of our time here. Holly, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, so we just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today in our conversation about divine feminine healing. We so appreciate you listening, and we'd love to know what you think of our podcast. So feel free to send us a DM. Our Instagram handles are mine is Holly Wheeler. My Instagram handle is the Peace Switch, and Eliana Miranda's Instagram handle is Wellness Weaver. So thanks again so much, and we'll see you next time here on We Heal.